Most of the people in the bar area, I mean, it's just shoulder to shoulder, are people from this racing club. I thought for sure we were going to get kicked out, like physically kicked out. Someone was going to lift us up and throw us out. So when I was a kid, my dad had a '69 Camaro. It was the first new car that he ever bought. It was actually kind of a graduation present for him. He bought it when he graduated college. He bought half of it. He had saved up half the money. His parents, my grandparents, kicked in the other half. And he had been driving a car back and forth to school that wasn't the most reliable. He was close enough to graduation. He was about a year away. I think his car actually broke down on the way back to school. They said, you know what, we're close enough. Let's just go get you a new car. So he went down to the dealership. I believe he told me he was really after a Superbird or a Roadrunner, something that was pretty hot. That was what he wanted. He was about to graduate with a aerospace engineering degree. I think he already had some potential locks on a job. So he was like, I want something that's got some power. But what he ended up finding was a '69 Camaro, Rally Sport Package, 350 engine, certainly not not the top of the line, but definitely not the bottom of the line. Had some power, great little car. So he decided, I'm just going to go ahead and get this. And it was a really cool car. I mean, it was a car that I remember as a kid always being the cool car. I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 1979. So he had this car, by the time I was born, he'd already had it a decade. He kept it, I think maybe until 86 or 87. So I remember this, in the first 5-6 years of my life. It was just the cool car. I followed my dad around whenever he would wash it, wax it, all that. I was right there. When he sold the car, I was a little bit bummed out, but these things happen. Parents have cars, they sell them. I thought, well, he'll get something cool again. That car made such an impression on me as a kid. Now I've actually sort of gone from the enjoyment of that car as a child to trying to tell the story of where that car was born, where that car actually came off the assembly line. And one of the reasons that that has become a possibility for me is where I live. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. Turns out that the Camaro was actually born in a suburb of Cincinnati called Norwood. Norwood Assembly. It's actually a pretty amazing automotive plant in General Motors history. It was the first plant that was built from the ground up outside of the state of Michigan. General Motors had acquired some other plants prior to the Norwood plant, but in the early 20s, they decided that they needed to expand their distribution routes further out, and they needed to build more plants outside of the state of Michigan. So Norwood was actually the first plant that General Motors built outside of the state of Michigan. It was the first plant that employed robotic welding, which now is commonplace. First plant that actually experimented with 24-hour production because of the popularity of the product that they built. That product was the Camaro and the Firebird. Because this plant, it's no longer there. It was actually leveled and closed and leveled in the late 80s. So there's really nothing there except for a parking garage. But because this car was such a formative part of my youth, and because this plant was in my backyard, I thought, it would really be interesting to try and collect some stories of people that worked at this plant, find out some history about it. And around that time, I found that there were some other people, there were people online that were interested in the history of the plant. Someone had written a book on the history of the plant, and there was a reunion that was being planned for plant workers. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Like me being a video guy, I do video work for a living. I thought, well, this is really cool. I should go to this reunion, maybe try and talk to this guy that wrote this book on the plant and just start collecting some stories and kind of see where this thing goes. So my dad and I had always talked about, he wished that he hadn't sold it. I wished he hadn't sold it. He used to drive back and forth from where we're from in Tennessee up to Dayton. He was an aerospace engineer, so he would go up to Wright Pat occasionally. There was an Air Force base in the town that I grew up in. And he would drive through Cincinnati up 75. And he always thought, I'm going to stop off and visit that plant. I'd love to see the plant where my car was born. And it wasn't just his car. The first Camaro that ever rolled off the line was in Norwood. It is a historically significant place for that alone. But he never really made the time to do it. And of course, we missed the opportunity. So as I started telling him about these things that I was finding, this reunion, the people that worked at the plant, and the person that wrote the book, we both got pretty excited about it, and it kind of reignited this idea of, maybe we can actually go and find this car. Maybe we can figure out where it's gone. So we started work on the documentary. The first interview we ever shot was in 2013, and we didn't know it would be a documentary at that point. We thought we'd just love to find some information out from these people that worked at the plant. So we went to this reunion, this plant reunion that they had. This was actually the second one that they had done, and just, started talking to people saying, hey, would you be willing to record some stories on camera? And we asked them, just things about like what it was like working in the plant and how did car manufacturing change throughout the lifetime of your career, those kinds of things. So we actually found out that one of the things that really made this plant a standout historically was that in the early 70s, that plant actually had the longest industrialized strike of any industry, any manufacturing industry, any industrial industry. The workers walked out and that plant stayed closed for almost a year. And during that time, safety standards had changed from 72 to 73. And what that meant was all the cars, there were about 1,100 cars that were left on the line when that walkout happened. Those cars couldn't be sold anymore because safety standards had changed to the point where the bodies that were being manufactured would not meet regulation. I think the rule was that GM negotiated with the government was that any car that they could actually start, that was on the line, that they could put gas in the tank and start it, they could still sell it as a previous model year. If they couldn't start it, it had to be junked. There were all kinds of things that were tried. They tried to sell these cars to another, a foreign country, thinking maybe the safety standard issue won't come into play. The United States government would not allow that to happen. I think around about 1,000 of these cars of the 1,100 that were left on the line ended up having to be scrapped. They just took the bodies right out into the back. They had a crusher. They crushed them down, scrapped them. So that was certainly an interesting element. It really led a lot of the strike movements that created a lot of the regulations now that auto workers enjoy working in plants. Norwood was an integral part of those strike movements that led to reform in workers' rights in the automotive industries. Concurrently, as we're starting this documentary on the Norwood plant, we also start looking for the history of this Camaro. And we have the VIN number. In fact, I'd love it if anyone sees this story and they can help us track this down if they know anything about the car. I'd love to get some information on it because we did find some information. We got as far as finding a resource that was able to help us from the VIN number do a search to find out who the last registered owner was. And this is not easy. This is not something that you can just go to your DMV and have done. You kind of have to know somebody who's willing to do a favor for you because let's just say it's in the gray area of the law. But we were able to make a friend who was able to do this. The last place we were able to track it down to was someone in Illinois that had it. And we actually reached out to that guy. We'd already reached out to the previous owners that we knew about. The person who bought it from my dad actually had turned it into a dragster. They had tubbed out the back end, put big racing slicks on the back, a huge 700 or 800 horsepower engine in it, and it was a track car at this point. So we knew that had already been done. We knew it wasn't in the same form it was when he owned it, but the story that we got from him was that in the earlier days of his business, he got a little strapped for cash and he took it to an auction to sell it. It went up on the block, didn't meet the reserve, didn't sell, but he needed cash. So after the auction, he went out to the parking lot and basically found some of the people that had bid on it and said, look, the first person that gives me $7,000 for this has it. So he sold it to somebody that he just wrote the bill of sale in the parking lot, gave him the keys, gave him the title, that was it. So he couldn't even remember who it went to. Through the course of ownership, we find this guy in Illinois that has had it. One really cool break in the story was we actually found a YouTube video of this guy racing the car. We can only assume it's the car because it's a big, tubbed out. At this point, it's got a hood with just a huge blower on it, which was different than what it was before. Before it did have an opening in the hood where the engine was sticking out, but it's got like this big blower hood on it, just booking it down the track. And it was the same color, 69 Camaro. It was that guy driving it. So we assume, okay, this has got to be the car. This is validating the search. So we reach out to the guy. My dad gets his number through, I think, a White Pages search, calls the number, leaves a message, says, hey, we're really into the history of this car. We're doing a documentary. At this point, we don't know if it's a documentary, but we're at least gathering stories, and it does eventually become a full-featured documentary that's actually coming out this year. We just said, we'd really love to find this car. We'd really love to just see it again and talk to you about what it is to you, what it means to you. We can tell you a little bit about what it means to us. And I was the first owner that bought it from a dealership. So we think, okay, I mean, if this is a car guy, he's gonna love this. He's gonna love to meet the first owner of this car. So my dad actually gets a call back from the owner, and the owner is pretty suspect. He's like, so tell me what it is again. I think you called my son and were telling him about this. I guess the number that he had found on the White Pages search was actually his son. I think they had the same first name. So he's pretty skeptical. My dad kind of explains it again. He said, oh, okay, well, all I know is my son called me really excited, but not in a good way, saying somebody's trying to find your car. So I'm just following up to find out what's going on. Not a lot of inviting tone here, so my dad says, well, we'd love to see it. We'd love to just come up and, maybe talk to you about it. We've been looking for this thing for years. I wished I hadn't sold it. We'd just love to see it again. So long pause. The guy doesn't really say anything. And he says, well, yeah, I don't really know if I can make that happen because I don't own it anymore. So we thought, okay, well, I guess the trail has run cold. So we pressed him a little bit. We're like, well, who did you sell it to? I mean, we're happy to do some more legwork. To just tell us who you sold it to. If you don't mind, maybe they'd let us come and see it. Well, I can't really do that. I actually sold it through a lawyer. It was a guy that was a car collector. Apparently, he was just a big-time car collector. He had a lawyer, did the whole transaction through this lawyer. So, I mean, I couldn't even tell you where to go. So we're kind of scratching our heads like that. I mean, I guess that's possible. I just don't really think it's plausible, but maybe it's possible. We have a few more conversations with him. We explain again. We're just fans of the history of Camaros in general. We want to find out what happened with this car. So he starts to soften a little bit, but still sticks to his story. He says, well, I sold this thing. I don't know where to tell you to go. We decided that we didn't believe the story. We said, that just sounds kind of hokey. There's got to be something else going on here. My theory was that maybe this guy was a little underwater on it. Maybe he had some debts. Maybe he still owed money on the car, and that he thought we were, debt collectors or somebody coming to seize the car, and this was just our story. So in the course of going out and shooting some footage for this documentary, we got to go and shoot some interviews with some folks that were designers at General Motors in the 60s and 70s. And we thought, while we're going up to shoot those interviews, we're actually going to make a little side trip over. We're going to go and find this racetrack where this video was shot. Because part of the story in this documentary, we thought, well, maybe we can weave this search for my dad's Camaro into the story somewhere. So we thought, well, we'll just go to this racetrack and shoot some B-roll. So we go to the racetrack, we shoot some stuff. My dad and I are out. They've got it locked up, but we're looking through the fence. We can verify it's the same track. The signage on the track stand and everything, the grandstand is the same. So we know it's the right place. We found out, I think we saw like a flyer or something posted to a pole. It was some just sort of happenstance situation. We found that a lot of the members that belong to this track and people that race there get together periodically at a bar just up the road. And I think it said something like every Saturday meet, the such and such track meet happens at this place. Happened to be Saturday. So we were like, you know what? Let's just go. Let's just go and maybe we can find some people to talk to. So we wrap up there, we travel up to this hole-in-the-wall bar, but it's packed. I mean, the whole place is packed. We can barely get into the door, and we come to find out that most of the people in the bar area, I mean, it's just shoulder to shoulder, are people from this racing club. I thought, okay, well, this is great. We'll just start asking some questions and see what we can find out. I thought it was going to be like the scene in the biker bar in Smokey and the Bandit where Snowman gets kicked out. I thought for sure we were going to get kicked out, like physically kicked out. Someone was going to lift us up and throw us out. But they were really, really nice folks. It took a little bit of time to break through the shell. But once we found a couple people that would kind of listen to us, other people started listening in. So we pull out pictures. We're showing the car. We're like, hey, this is kind of the story. We've been looking for this car for years. We're telling the story of the birth of the Camaro, in general in this documentary. Do you know anything about it? Most people are like, oh yeah, I know that guy, I know that car. Yeah, I don't know what's happened to it. At this point, they're introducing other people to us, like, oh yeah, listen to this guy's story. So this guy comes up, kind of around back as my dad's talking to somebody, and he pulls me aside and he's like, I know where that car is. So I said, what? You know where this car is? Oh yeah, I know that guy. He didn't sell it. I know right where it is. So I pull my dad over. I'm like, hey, talk to this guy. Like, you know, let's figure out how we can go and see the car. So he's like, yeah, you know, I know that guy. I know the car. I've seen that car race for years. We couldn't really ever get any information out of him as to why, but he's like, yeah, I know where that car is. So we get his contact information. He's like, don't worry, I'll follow up with you. We'll coordinate something. I'll talk to the guy too. You know, he's just a pretty private guy. We'll work something out. So we're really excited leaving. We start to call the guy a couple of days later after we get the rest of our filming done. We had a couple of other stops on the trip. Call the guy, no answer. Call the guy, no answer. Leave multiple messages. We'd send him an email. He gave us his email, nothing. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if that guy got threatened and said, you do not tell anyone where this car is. But the trail ran cold again. We can't get the guy to return our calls. So apparently my dad's Camaro is just a real hot commodity that needs to stay behind closed doors. We have no idea where it is, but we're looking. I'm hoping that whoever owns it now maybe is open to the first owner of this car coming back to be reunited with it, because we'd still love to see it.
Once again, I want to thank Bridgestone for their support of VINwiki this month, for their support of the channel, and all they're going to do with us throughout the year. We're going to test some tires, use some tires, and have them talk about what the tire business is like from their perspective and all the great things that Bridgestone is doing as a brand, including becoming an OEM offering on cars like Porsches, Lamborghinis, and things like that in the past couple of years. And so I know that you're going to love that, but I know that you'll also love their tires. And so whether you go to Tire Rack and order a set of Bridgestones for your car, or also check them out at the link in the description below, check out the Potenza range of tires for road cars, supercars, sports cars, hypercars. They are amazing, and I know they'll treat you well. Have a great day.